The throne room of the sovereigns could have housed a small city, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadows that even the ship's advanced lighting systems couldn't fully penetrate. Thomas Kim stood among the crowd of observers, trying to look inconspicuous while simultaneously marveling at the architectural impossibilities surrounding him. Kilarian engineering defied human understanding of physics, creating spaces that seemed larger inside than the ship's external dimensions could possibly contain. The biometal's resonance frequency has been altered, Princess Vesa announced, her voice carrying across the vast chamber with the kind of authority that made hardened military officers snap to attention. Someone has tampered with my armor. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, his standard-issue human diplomatic uniform feeling woefully inadequate compared to the flowing robes and ceremonial gear worn by the Kilarian nobles around him. The princess stood on the central dais, her ceremonial armor displayed on a crystalline mounting system that made the biometal surface shimmer like liquid starlight. Even from his position near the back of the assembled crowd, Thomas could see the subtle improvements he'd made to the power distribution networks. This is not standard maintenance, Princess Vesa continued, running her fingers along the armor's surface with the kind of familiarity that spoke of countless battles fought and won. The molecular alignment has been optimized beyond our current technical specifications. A ripple of nervous energy passed through the crowd. Thomas had been part of the Human Technical Exchange Program for 6 months, working alongside Kilarian engineers to study their biotechnology and share human innovations in return. The project was supposed to foster cooperation between their species, but moments like this made him wonder if he'd accidentally started an interstellar incident instead. Furthermore, the princess said, her violet eyes scanning the assembled court with predatory intensity, the crystalline power cores have been recalibrated to operate at 96% efficiency. Our best technicians rarely achieve better than 80%. Lord Commander Thex, the princess's military advisor, stepped forward with the flowing grace characteristic of his species. His skin held the pale blue tint that marked him as one of the Kilarian warrior caste, and the bioluminescent patches along his neck pulsed with agitation. Your Highness, perhaps one of the maintenance crew exceeded their authority. Exceeded their authority? Princess Vesa's laugh held no warmth, the sound echoing off the chamber's crystalline walls. Commander, this level of work represents a fundamental understanding of biometal architecture that takes decades to develop. This is not the result of an overeager technician. Thomas watched the princess examine her armor with the kind of focused intensity he'd seen in human engineers when they encountered technology that shouldn't exist. Her movements were fluid and precise, each gesture speaking of someone who understood her equipment at a level that went beyond mere familiarity. The armor itself was a masterpiece of Kilarian craftsmanship, its living metal surface shifting between deep purple and silver as the princess's hands moved across its contours. Thomas remembered the hours he'd spent studying its structure, mapping the intricate network of bioneural pathways that connected the various systems, identifying inefficiencies that had accumulated over years of field repairs and hasty modifications. The power flow patterns have been redesigned, Princess Vesa announced, her voice rising with a mixture of anger and something that might have been impressed disbelief. Not repaired, redesigned. Someone has fundamentally improved upon technology that has been perfected over 3 millennia. The assembled nobles began whispering among themselves in their musical language, creating a symphony of concerned speculation that filled the throne room with nervous energy. Thomas caught fragments of their conversation through his translation implant, words about human interference and questions about the security of their most advanced technologies. Your Highness, Lady Zara stepped forward, her ceremonial robes shimmering with embedded bioluminescent fibers. Surely no outsider could possess such knowledge of our systems. Princess Vesa turned to face the assembled crowd, her expression carrying the kind of controlled fury that had made her one of the most feared military commanders in 3-star systems. That is precisely what I intend to discover. Her voice rang out across the chamber, sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. Who repaired this armor? The silence that followed was the kind that precedes either confessions or executions. Thomas felt every eye in the room scanning the crowd, looking for signs of guilt or knowledge that might identify the culprit. His fellow humans from the Technical Exchange Program stood together near the eastern wall, their faces carefully neutral while their body language screamed innocence. Thomas realized that remaining silent would only make things worse when the truth inevitably emerged. The princess was clearly intelligent enough to trace the modifications back to their source, and trying to hide would only convince her that malicious intent had been involved. He took a deep breath and stepped forward from the crowd. "I did, Your Highness." The admission hit the throne room like a small explosion. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, and Thomas found himself the focus of several hundred pairs of eyes, most of which belonged to beings who could probably kill him with their bare hands. The princess turned toward him with movements that reminded him of a predator identifying its next meal. "You," she said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "are human." "Yes, Your Highness." Thomas Kim, materials engineer, assigned to the technical exchange program. Princess Vesa approached him with steps that made no sound on the polished floor, her presence somehow making the vast throne room feel uncomfortably small. This close, Thomas could see that her violet eyes held flecks of silver that seemed to shift and swirl like captured galaxies. "Explain to me, Engineer Kim," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made his bones vibrate, "how a human, working with what I assume is primitive technology, managed to improve upon Kilarian bioengineering that has been refined for over 3,000 years. Thomas straightened his shoulders, drawing on every scrap of confidence he'd accumulated during his years of technical training. "With respect, Your Highness, I didn't improve upon your technology. I optimized it." The distinction between improvement and optimization apparently mattered to Princess Vesa, because her expression shifted from barely controlled fury to something approaching curiosity. Thomas felt the collective tension in the throne room ratchet down by several degrees, though he was still acutely aware that one wrong word could land him in whatever passed for a Kilarian detention facility. "Elaborate," the princess commanded, circling him with the kind of predatory grace that made Thomas grateful for the diplomatic immunity supposedly granted to technical exchange personnel. "Your armor's biometal structure is incredibly sophisticated," Thomas began, trying to keep his voice steady while being examined by one of the galaxy's most dangerous individuals. "The problem isn't with the design, it's with the accumulated inefficiencies from years of field repairs." Princess Vesa stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the subtle bioluminescent patterns beneath her skin that marked her as Kilarian royalty. "Continue." Thomas gestured toward the displayed armor, hoping his hands weren't shaking visibly. "Every time a section gets damaged and repaired, small misalignments creep into the molecular structure. Over time, these create resistance points in the power distribution network. The biometal tries to compensate, but it's like trying to play a symphony on an instrument that's slightly out of tune. And you corrected these misalignments?" Lord Commander Thex interjected, his tone suggesting he found the idea preposterous. "I mapped the entire power network first," Thomas explained, pulling out his portable diagnostic tablet and calling up the holographic displays he'd created during his analysis. "Human nanotechnology is really good at molecular-level scanning. Once I could see the complete structure, the inefficiency patterns became obvious." The holographic armor that materialized above his tablet showed a complex web of energy pathways, with red indicators marking disruption points throughout the biometal matrix. Princess Vesa leaned closer to examine the display, her proximity making Thomas acutely aware of the subtle electromagnetic field that surrounded her like a living aurora. "These disruption points," she said, pointing to clusters of red indicators, "they correspond to battle damage I sustained during the siege of Altair Prime. And here," Thomas highlighted another section, "this looks like damage from plasma weapons, probably from the Vegan Liberation Front based on the energy signature patterns." Princess Vesa's eyes widened slightly. "How could you possibly know about specific engagement patterns?" Thomas felt heat creeping up his neck, realizing he'd revealed more knowledge than might be diplomatically wise. I studied your combat records. For research purposes. To understand how the armor performs under different stress conditions." The silence that followed stretched long enough for Thomas to contemplate several unpleasant possibilities for his immediate future. Then, unexpectedly, Princess Vesa laughed, a sound like silver bells being struck by lightning. You studied my combat records, she repeated, her voice carrying a note of what might have been impressed disbelief. To understand my armor's performance characteristics. It seemed like the logical approach, Thomas said, wondering if he'd just made things better or infinitely worse. Show me the corrections you made, Princess Vesa commanded, moving toward the displayed armor with renewed interest. Thomas followed her to the crystalline mounting system, calling up additional holographic displays that overlaid his modifications onto the physical armor. The primary issue was power flow optimization. The biometal was routing energy around damaged areas instead of through properly repaired channels. He highlighted specific sections where he'd realigned the molecular structure, explaining how he'd used targeted electromagnetic fields to guide the biometal's natural healing processes. The princess listened with focused intensity, occasionally asking technical questions that demonstrated her own deep understanding of the technology. This recalibration of the crystalline cores, she said, running her fingers along the glowing power sources embedded in the armor's chest plate, how did you achieve such precise resonance matching? Harmonic frequency analysis, Thomas replied, warming to the technical discussion. Human audio processing algorithms are really good at identifying optimal resonance patterns. I just adapted them for crystalline matrices instead of sound waves. Princess Vesa activated the armor's diagnostic systems, and Thomas watched with satisfaction as the efficiency readings climbed higher than he'd even hoped to achieve. The biometal's surface rippled with increased energy flow, its color shifting to deeper, richer hues that spoke of optimal function. 97.3% efficiency, Lord Commander Thex read from the diagnostic display, his voice carrying a note of stunned disbelief. That should be impossible. It's not impossible, Princess Vesa said quietly, her eyes fixed on Thomas with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. It's simply a perspective we hadn't considered. The murmur of conversation from the assembled nobles grew louder as the implications of the reading spread through the crowd. Thomas caught fragments of discussion about human technical capabilities, questions about the security of Kilarian military technology, and speculation about what other improvements might be possible. Engineer Kim, Princess Vesa said, her formal tone cutting through the background chatter, I require a full technical briefing on your modification procedures. You will accompany me to the engineering sections immediately. Thomas glanced toward his fellow humans from the technical exchange program, noting their expressions of concern mixed with what looked suspiciously like relief that they weren't being singled out for royal attention. Yes, Your Highness. The rest of you, Princess Vesa addressed the assembled court, will continue with the scheduled diplomatic functions. Lord Commander Thex, ensure that Engineer Kim's colleagues are provided with appropriate accommodations and entertainment. As the crowd began to disperse, Thomas found himself walking beside Princess Vesa toward the throne room's exit, trying not to think about the stories he'd heard regarding her treatment of subordinates who failed to meet her expectations. The bioluminescent patterns beneath her skin pulsed with what he hoped was curiosity rather than predatory anticipation. Tell me, Engineer Kim, she said as they entered the corridor leading to the ship's technical sections, what other human innovations might prove compatible with Kilarian systems. Thomas considered the question while they walked through passages that curved and twisted in ways that hurt to think about too carefully. That would depend on what problems you're trying to solve, Your Highness. Princess Vesa's smile showed teeth that were slightly too sharp to be entirely comforting. Oh, I have quite a few problems that could use solving. The engineering bay of the sovereigns will look like someone had crossed a cathedral with a laboratory and then let organic architecture run wild for several centuries. Crystalline support columns grew from floor to ceiling in patterns that followed mathematical principles Thomas couldn't begin to understand, while bioluminescent conduits pulsed with energy flows that seemed to respond to Princess Vesa's presence. Impressive, isn't it? She said, noting his wide-eyed examination of the space. This bay has been growing for over 800 years. Each generation of engineers adds their own innovations to the structure. Thomas nodded, trying to process the idea of living architecture that evolved over time. How do you maintain system compatibility across so many modifications? That, Princess Vesa said with a smile that suggested she'd been hoping he'd ask that question, is one of our most persistent challenges. She led him to a workstation that looked like it had been carved from a single massive crystal, its surface covered with holographic displays showing the ship's various systems in real time. Thomas recognized some of the patterns from his study of Killarian technology, but the complexity was orders of magnitude beyond anything he'd encountered in the technical exchange program. "Your modifications to my armor," Princess Vesa began, calling up detailed scans of the biometal structure, suggest an understanding of harmonic integration that goes beyond simple repair work. "I spent a lot of time studying the resonance patterns," Thomas admitted, watching as his optimization work was displayed in three-dimensional detail. "The biometal seems to function almost like a living nervous system." "Because it is," Princess Vesa said matter-of-factly. "The armor bonds with its wearer at a cellular level, creating a hybrid organism that combines biological reflexes with technological enhancement." Thomas felt his worldview shift slightly as implications cascaded through his mind. "So when I optimized the power flow patterns, you improved the neural integration between the armor and myself," Princess Vesa finished. "Which explains why my reaction time in combat simulations has improved by 32%. She activated a holographic training program, and Thomas watched in fascination as Princess Vesa moved through combat sequences that would have been impossible for unenhanced humans. The armor flowed around her like liquid metal, anticipating her movements and amplifying her natural abilities to superhuman levels. "The efficiency improvements you achieved," she said, pausing mid-sequence to examine a diagnostic readout, "they're not just technical optimizations. They're enhancement of the biological bond itself." Thomas studied the neural integration patterns displayed on the crystal workstation, beginning to understand the full implications of his modifications. "I improved your reflexes by improving the armor's ability to interface with your nervous system." "Exactly," Princess Vesa said, deactivating the training program and turning to face him directly. "Which raises an interesting question about human understanding of biotechnological systems." Before Thomas could ask what she meant, alarms began blaring throughout the engineering bay. Emergency lighting bathed the crystalline structures in pulsing red illumination while automated systems announced containment failures in multiple sections. "What's happening?" Thomas asked, watching as Princess Vesa's casual demeanor transformed into focused military alertness. "Sabotage," she replied grimly, her fingers flying over the crystal workstation's controls. "Someone has introduced cascade failures into our primary bioneural networks." The holographic displays showed spreading patterns of system failures throughout the ship, red indicators multiplying as the sabotage virus propagated through the living architecture. Thomas recognized the signature patterns from his study of Killarian technology, but the attack vector was unlike anything in their standard security protocols. "This is targeted specifically at the biometal integration systems," Thomas realized, analyzing the failure patterns. "Someone's using the living architecture against itself." Princess Vesa's expression darkened as she pulled up security feeds from throughout the ship. "The conservative faction. They've been opposed to the technical exchange program since its inception. They're trying to destroy the evidence of human-Killarian collaboration," Thomas said, watching as more systems fell offline. "If they can make it look like human technology caused catastrophic failures. The exchange program ends, and our species return to their respective isolationist policies," Princess Vesa finished. "Leaving them free to pursue their pure Killarian supremacy agenda." Thomas studied the cascade failure patterns, his mind racing through possible solutions. "The virus is using the biometal's natural healing responses against itself. Every time the system tries to repair damage, it creates more vulnerability points. Can you stop it?" Princess Vesa asked, her voice carrying the kind of urgency that suggested failure might result in the destruction of the entire ship. "Maybe," Thomas said, his hands already moving over the crystal interface as he began tracing the virus's propagation pathways. "But I'll need to interface directly with the ship's bioneural network." Princess Vesa's eyes widened. "That's incredibly dangerous. The network isn't designed for human nervous systems." "Your armor interfaces with human-modified biometal," Thomas pointed out, pulling up the optimization patterns he'd created. The harmonic frequencies should be compatible. Without waiting for permission, Thomas began modifying the workstation's neural interface protocols, adapting them to match the resonance patterns he'd established with Princess Vasa's armor. The process required splitting his attention between technical calculations and a growing cascade of system failures spreading throughout the ship. "Thomas," Princess Vasa said, using his first name for the first time, "if this doesn't work, the feedback could kill you." "If this doesn't work," Thomas replied, initiating the neural connection sequence, "the ship dies anyway, and takes both our species' hopes for cooperation with it." The moment his consciousness touched the ship's bioneural network, Thomas understood why Kilarian technology had seemed so impossible to human engineers. The Sovereign's will wasn't just a ship, it was a living entity, its thoughts vast and ancient and utterly alien. But underneath the alien architecture, he recognized patterns similar to those he'd worked with in Princess Vasa's armor. Fighting the sabotage virus became a battle of harmonics and resonance, Thomas using his understanding of both human and Kilarian technology to create antibody responses that could neutralize the attack. Princess Vasa worked alongside him, her natural connection to the ship's systems providing the biological interface he needed to implement his solutions. Together, they began to save not just the ship, but the future of interspecies cooperation itself. The neural interface with the Sovereign's will felt like trying to have a conversation with a living galaxy, vast, ancient, and filled with thoughts that moved at speeds human consciousness wasn't designed to process. Thomas gritted his teeth as he fought to maintain his connection while the sabotage virus continued its assault on the ship's bioneural networks. "The cascade is accelerating," Princess Vasa reported, her hands dancing across the crystal workstation's controls as she tried to contain the spreading failures. "We're losing primary life support systems throughout the lower decks." Through the neural link, Thomas could feel the ship's pain as its living systems were corrupted and turned against themselves. The virus was elegant in its cruelty, using the biometal's natural healing responses to create new infection vectors every time the ship tried to repair itself. "I need to get to the central nervous nexus," Thomas said, his consciousness diving deeper into the ship's architectural maze. "If I can create antibody protocols at the core level, they should propagate through the entire network." "The nexus is protected by bioneural feedback systems," Princess Vasa warned. "They're designed to prevent exactly this kind of intrusion." "Then I'll need you to convince the ship to let me in," Thomas replied, feeling the first tendrils of his improvised antibody code beginning to take shape in the network's peripheral systems. "Your armor modifications created a harmonic signature that the ship recognizes as safe." Princess Vasa closed her eyes and placed her hands on the crystal interface, her bioluminescent patterns flaring as she established her own connection to the ship's consciousness. Through the neural link, Thomas felt her presence like a warm beacon in the vast digital ocean of the Sovereign's will's thoughts. "Sovereign," she whispered, using the ship's actual name rather than its formal designation, "this human is trying to help us. Let him pass." The resistance that had been blocking Thomas's progress suddenly evaporated, replaced by something that felt almost like curiosity from the ship's ancient consciousness. He dove toward the central nexus, his antibody protocols spreading through the bioneural networks like beneficial viruses designed to hunt and destroy their malicious counterparts. "It's working," Princess Vasa announced, watching as system status indicators began shifting from red to amber throughout the ship. "The cascade is slowing." Thomas felt the sabotage virus fighting back, its code adapting to his countermeasures with frightening speed. Whoever had designed this attack understood both Kilarian biotechnology and human programming techniques, creating hybrid assault protocols that neither species would have been able to counter independently. "The virus is adapting," he reported, sweat beading on his forehead as he fought to stay ahead of the malicious code's evolution. "I need more processing power to generate antibody variants fast enough." "Use the armor," Princess Vasa said suddenly. "The optimizations you made created a direct neural pathway between my consciousness and the biometal matrix. If you can interface through that connection." Without hesitation, Thomas reached out through the ship's network toward Princess Vasa's armor, still displayed in the throne room several decks above. The moment his consciousness touched the optimized biometal, he felt his processing capacity multiply exponentially as the armor's enhanced neural integration boosted his cognitive abilities. Together, human ingenuity and Killarian biotechnology began generating antibody protocols faster than the virus could adapt. Thomas felt like he was thinking with a mind made of living metal and crystallized light, his human creativity amplified by alien technology that responded to thought as quickly as neurons fired. System integrity restored, Princess Vesa announced, her voice filled with relief as green status indicators began appearing throughout the ship's networks. The virus is contained and neutralized. Thomas disconnected from the neural interface, his consciousness snapping back to his own body with enough force to leave him dizzy and disoriented. Princess Vesa caught his arm as he swayed, her touch sending small electrical sparks across his skin that spoke of the continued connection between them. "That was incredible," she said, her violet eyes bright with excitement and something that looked like genuine admiration. "The way you adapted human algorithms to work with our bioneural architecture, I've never seen anything like it." "I had help," Thomas replied, gesturing toward the displays still showing the successful antibody protocols spreading through the ship's systems. "Your armor's neural optimization made it possible. Neither human nor Killarian technology could have stopped that virus alone." The engineering bay's main entrance dilated to admit Lord Commander Thex and a squad of security personnel, their expressions mixing relief with barely contained anger. "Your Highness, we've identified the saboteurs. 3 members of the Purist Council, working with human isolationist sympathizers." Princess Vesa's expression hardened. "They nearly destroyed the ship to prevent our species from working together." "What they actually did," Thomas said, studying the data logs from their successful defense, "was prove that collaboration between our technologies is not only possible, but essential for solving problems that neither of us could handle independently." Over the next several hours, as the Sovereign's will completed its system repairs and security teams rounded up the remaining saboteurs, Thomas found himself in increasingly detailed technical discussions with Princess Vesa and her engineering staff. The hybrid solutions they developed during the crisis opened up possibilities that excited scientists from both species. "The neural integration protocols you created," Princess Vesa said as they stood once again in the throne room, watching her armor's diagnostic systems display efficiency readings that continue to climb, "they could revolutionize how we approach biotechnological development." Thomas nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities for future collaboration. "And your biometal architecture could solve some of humanity's biggest challenges in adaptive manufacturing and regenerative systems. I'm formally requesting that you accept a permanent position as my chief technical advisor," Princess Vesa announced, her words carrying the weight of official royal decree. "The joint engineering programs we could develop would benefit both our civilizations." Thomas looked around the throne room, remembering his nervousness just hours ago when he'd stepped forward to claim responsibility for repairing her armor. Now he was being offered the chance to help reshape the relationship between two species, using technology that bridged the gap between human innovation and alien wisdom. "Your Highness," he said, offering a formal bow that probably violated several protocols but felt appropriate given the circumstances, "I accept." Princess Vesa's smile could have powered the ship's engines. "Excellent. Your first assignment will be helping me redesign the entire royal fleet's bioneural networks. I have a feeling we're going to accomplish things that neither of our species thought possible." As Thomas looked at the restored armor, its biometal surface now gleaming with enhanced efficiency and hybrid human-Killarian innovations, he realized that sometimes the most important discoveries came not from replacing what existed, but from finding ways to make it work better. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges that would require the best minds from multiple civilizations working together. And judging by Princess Vesa's expression as she activated her armor's new capabilities, they were just getting started.